To this thing is the Egyptians, and for a very long time Egypt has been a beneficiary of the Nile. In fact, Egypt is the Nile, and I really believe that if you look at the figures, and if you look at the structure of the amount of water that's going to go through the dams and through the turbines, and what eventually ends up in Egypt, and I've looked at this closely for a time now, there's really not much of a difference. The contentious issues, Debal, during periods of, say, drought, and what kind of guarantees Egypt has for getting sufficient amount of water. But at the end of the day, Ethiopia has every right to build a dam to get electricity, so that we in East Africa can exchange and trade on these issues. Kenya can get Ethiopian electricity cheaply, and we can provide other things for Ethiopia. But I see that it is very important, because Egypt is the preeminent military power in Africa, together with South Africa. And I think that it's very important that for this to end in a negotiated way, so that everybody gets a win-win situation. I think Mr. Pompeo there is making sure to calm the Egyptian nerves, because the Egyptians are very, very, very nervous about this. Of course, you know, Debal, they have come here to Kenya many times to tell Kenyans to help intervene. The Egyptians have water scientists in Uganda, here in Lake Victoria, they're there. So you can tell that it's a very serious issue. But I think what Mr. Pompeo Debal has not only gone there to do the dam. Debal, you know, in my culture we have a saying which says, or the upkadu. So Mr. Abiy is now a point man for the Americans in the region. And as you know, the other day in the AU summit, he put Mr. Farmajo and Mr. Bihi of Somaliland together. And this has caused a huge hullabaloo in the region, if everybody has been following this closely. Mr. Farmajo is supposed to visit Hargeisa, and you know that Somaliland has declared independence. Yesterday, the president of Somaliland flatly rejected it and said that he's not going to allow it. But Mr. Farmajo has done something very good, and that he has spoken about some of the truth and reconciliation issues that are now in Somalia. And he apologized to the northern region for the bombing of the bombing of Hargeisa in the last regime.
Now, let's first of all underpin the fact that Egypt needs the Nile waters. Yeah. Nobody wants to kill Egypt because the moment you dry. Now, I went to Egypt last year, but December. I really felt for them. Went to Aswan, north. Yeah. I mean, the border with Sudan, yeah. And then came by sea, and you could see the many cruise ships that are on the side stuck in the mud because the Nile levels have gone down.
It's receding, yes.
Yeah, there's so many on the sidelines, and I really pitied the Egyptians and wondered, why can't we keep this water flowing so that at least this economy can go on? So Egypt is suffering. Obviously, the population is increasing. And not just their population, but neighbors coming to Egypt because of insecurity in the Middle East. So their own population and the population of the neighbors require a lot of feeding. So we cannot overstate the importance of the Nile and that fresh water for not only Egypt, but for the neighbors. And it is not a surprise, therefore, the single most important geopolitical issue is the Nile. And when there's an Egyptian became the Secretary General of the United Nations, Boutros Ghali. The greatest legacy in terms of thought is that the next war will not be about oil, it will be about water. Yeah. That's what he said. And you know, Anwar Sadat literally said that he's ready to go to war than to see the Nile dry out. So we need to take those issues a little bit seriously. But on the other hand, in Ethiopia, the Renaissance Dam is a nationalist issue. I was there when we were burying Meles, and the people, ordinary people, were chanting, Meles will finish the dam. Meles will finish the dam. That's the promise they were making to their dead hero. And you could get the palpable feel that the dam, the industrialization of Ethiopia and everything is a nationalist issue. It is not a policy issue as such. And therefore, we need to bring the two together because these have implications for the stability of the region, because Egypt and Ethiopia in instability, you cannot underestimate their capacity to feed proxy wars in this region. And for Kenya, Somalia, Eritrea, Djibouti, and all, the whole question of proxy wars. And we have suffered in this region because of proxy wars. They are more devastating than openly declared wars. Therefore, in conclusion, what one is trying to say is that this need to be high on the agenda of the African Union as an issue that we need to find solution to on a more permanent basis. Development of the riparian state, Kenya, Ethiopia, and others, is primary, and it depends on us harnessing water. I have never seen a region that require environmental rehabilitation so that we can have sufficient water as we need than this one. And Egypt needs to be part of the solution, not part of the threat. It needs to work with the countries here to ensure that we have water enough here and there is enough also for Egypt. And that's an environmental question.
Okay. But in light of issues of climate change as it is right now, because I believe they have a very germane reason, as you say, water is receding. We're actually trying also to put water in a dam. Was there a robust environmental impact assessment before this particular dam project was done? So these issues were not really teased out. Why are we having all this toing and froing on it? Dr. Hassan Khaminje.
I think the current debate is not does not regard exactly the environmental impact. It's actually the fear of Egypt. Now, as Prof just mentioned,
what is really feeding the fear?
The fear, because as where the Nile goes, so goes Egypt.
So goes Egypt.
Is one country that is most dependent on one source of water than any other that you can imagine, and that is the Nile. The history of Egypt revolves around the Nile. Now the challenge, though, for 100 years or close to that, in 1929, 1959 treaties, Egypt almost had an exclusive monopoly over the use of the River Nile. And at the time, I think it was the second most populous country on the continent. Right now, it's number 3. It has about 100 million. I think Ethiopia is about 110 million now. Now, this dam is of great national or nationalistic importance to lots of Ethiopian psyche, you know. But also in practical terms, while industrially Ethiopia is still a little bit behind Kenya, the double-digit growth in the last decade or so means that they're actually going to need a lot more power to drive the economy. Just this an editorial on by the Brookings Institution, one of the most preeminent think tank in the United States, actually advising Egypt and Ethiopia to dump the Washington-led rushed arrangement. That because it's not going to work, and you know, this is Brookings saying that. I did not think it was going to take place, you know, either last month when they tried in Washington or this month. It's not going to happen. Now, part of the challenge for Ethiopia is Egypt is insisting on maintaining a veto over any future projects on the Nile. 2, it wants the filling of the dam to take much longer period. Now, Ethiopia does not think that it's going to be practical because of its need to start making use of the $5 billion investment. You know, they cannot wait between 12 or 20 years. They want to do it sooner. And so, if they can negotiate and actually reach some kind of an arrangement where, for instance, there is understanding between the upstream countries and the downstream countries. Because remember, for the longest time, Egypt has had a monopoly. And this is something that has not really been discussed sufficiently. And so Ethiopia thinks, look, the Blue Nile is also 50% of this river, and we've never been able to profit from it. How can we not have a say? There has to be negotiations that are actually serious and not rushed. The AU should be robustly involved in this because this has implications for the continental security, you know, to be honest with you. And if we outsource it to Washington, which doesn't live here, it's going to be a problem. We are the ones who live here, you see. Lake Victoria is also part of the source of the River Nile. So all these things are affected. Exactly. Yeah. And so if we need to bring this debate actually back on the continent and move it away from Washington,
Right. Professor Nomi Damba.
Well, a lot has been said about this. The history will prove us wrong or right. This needs to be African solution. It's a long-term solution. Egypt cannot continue to depend on this, say, if River Nile goes, Egypt goes. Israel has one of the largest desalination plant in the world, pumping water from the sea into Israel and feeding its population. Egypt must think differently, cannot stay in the box. And the point is, the source of this water is Lake Victoria. What about the Great Lakes countries? What about Kenya? What about Uganda? What about Sudan? What about Egypt, Ethiopia? So everybody needs to think a better way, a better solution of using this water rather than someone sitting and saying it is our right. Because there is no that such right. And so there must be a rational way of thinking beyond the British mandated or signature that was done. We are independent countries.
Right. And water body is a shared resource, as it is, Dr. Mustafa.
I think, Dibal, Egypt will need to look at many other alternatives besides River Nile, including desalination plants. Well, it's a good thing that, you know, huge reserves of gas, I think, have been discovered in Egypt, and they can use that a resource to build desalination plants. Saudi Arabia does the same, the United Arab Emirates, and many other countries that do not actually even have rivers. But having said this, River Nile still remains the major source of life. It's actually, if River Nile was to be, the flow of River Nile was to be reduced by, say, 25%, then that in itself can constitute an existential threat to Egypt at the moment. Now, in geostrategic terms, geopolitics, Egypt will need to really engage the upper riparian states, including those that are, you know, the Great Lakes region. Geostrategy is about shaping and being shaped. The problem here is that each and every country, particularly these two countries, Ethiopia and Egypt, each one wants to shape, does not want to be shaped. They need to agree on how best this is going to happen. And I think it's incumbent upon the Ethiopians that they actually reduce the number of, or rather they increase the number of years for which the dam is going to fill up in order not to dry up parts of the Nile Delta. But the core of these issues, fundamentally, the issue of demography is something that Egypt has to address. The population is growing very fast, is very high, it's not sustainable. The other issue is, of course, the negotiation that is ongoing. This is an issue that should be dealt with by the Africa Union. I mean, having the United States coming here to help in dealing with these issues is an indictment to the AU. And it's best that the challenge of the Nile is addressed through platforms or processes that the Africa Union develops.
Right. Thank you. Brigadier.
Yeah, Diba, on this issue, very delicate and very sensitive in that Egypt has been very clear in terms of its options on interference on the Nile. And this builds on from history, way back in the last century when we had the Anglo-Egyptian Treaty. And then building in all the way into the riparian meetings which are held, I think, quite recently, 1999, and quite recently. And at this point, nothing came up in terms of the countries opposing or asking for a review. At one point, they asked for a review, but it didn't go very far. So in terms of the options for Egypt, in terms of what they should do, in terms of best way out, this should have been discussed maybe 20 years ago when we got to independence. That was the time to have discussed Egypt taking different options. She has sat quiet all along. She has maintained that position very well. She has said she will not take any nonsense on this, and she's ready for action if need be. So really, in terms of a way forward, very complicated. I agree the AU must come in. We must engage fully all the riparian states. I'm surprised we got this far without having addressed it at the early years when it was still young. It's gone very far now. It becomes very complicated. I also agree in terms of the African Union coming in. an African solution would be the best way to address, not forgetting also the element of international partners, because at the end of the day, it's give and take for both of them, which will not be easy and will be very hard to resolve.
Right. Even as we're winding up, I think we were also primed to actually discuss the AU summit resolutions that we just had, the 33rd AU summit. But it's a good point. Why has this not been very effectively handled by the AU as it is right now? Maybe Peter Kagon, you can bring us up to speed as we prepare also our headline thoughts.
For the sake of our viewers, it is important to clarify why the Egyptian-Ethiopian situation is the way it is. It's because the Nile has two sources. There is the White Nile and the Blue Nile. The Blue Nile rises from Lake Tana inside Ethiopia, and it contributes 80% of the water that flows into the Nile. The White Nile originates deep into Rwanda and so on, drains into Lake Victoria, and from Kenya and others, and then that constitutes about 20% of the water that gets into the Nile and which goes to Egypt. And therefore, an understanding between Egypt and Ethiopia on how to manage the Nile is very critical. That's one. Second, obviously, for the larger region, there is the so-called Nile Basin Initiative, which is brokered by the African Union, the East African communities, and others. So there is already an existing regional mechanism to deal with this. And I think Egypt needs to be active in this, because it's the only framework within which this situation can amicably and without a lot of this acrimony be dealt with. And the other thing is, I have lived in Ethiopia. Yes, and I have lived in Kenya. Part of the problem of the so-called the underground water table going down is because of the afforestation processes in Ethiopia, because the imperial Ethiopia planted the entire country with eucalyptus. All their trees are eucalyptus. It is true. The entire country is planted with eucalyptus. Our Kenyan experience has told us that the water table will go down. In my village, we cut most of the eucalyptus trees. And a river that we were seeing was seasonal is now flowing throughout after we did that. Abiy has planted 350 million trees this year. I hope they are not eucalyptus. but he has planted 300 million trees, because that's going to be counterproductive.
Thank you.
So let's do afforestation.
Right. Headline thoughts, 10 seconds.
I want to highlight that Mr. Abiy wanted to land in Hargeisa with Mr. Farmajo, and the president of Somaliland and his National Assembly said no. But I think that's a huge step right now into the Somali peace process. I think a big wall has been brought down, and I think sooner or later these visits will start occurring, and that is in the interest of the Republic of Kenya, a stable, united system in Somalia that takes care of its own security is in our own national security.
Right. Dr. Mustafa?
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah, it's very important to have a Somali federal government that is stable, that is united, and that is able to deal with Al-Shabaab fairly and squarely. It's in the interest of Kenya.
Okay. Brigadier General?
Yes, definitely a stable Somalia, a stable region is really important for all of us, and we should really work towards building that. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Dr. Mustafa. Dr. Hassan.
Yeah, there is a Kenyan, I think, university lecturer who's been fired for plagiarizing a Nigerian PhD. I think we need to establish a system to make sure that all PhDs are authenticated. And please, Kenyans, you don't use the title doctor if you don't have an earned PhD. Honorary doctorates do not qualify you to use the term doctor.
Thank you. Very important.
All right, Professor Naomi Damba.
The future of this country of Kenya belongs to every one of us, and every one of us must give it 100%. We must stop corruption so that we can stop borrowing more money, and that is the responsibility of every Kenyan.
All right, we had from Brigadier? Did we? Yes. Peter Koganja? Everyone.
I just want to reiterate what my colleague has said, that if you don't have a PhD and an honorary doctorate cannot warrant you to call yourself a doctor.
Thank you.
And Kenyans should be reminded that way. Even if you have 20 honorary doctorates, those are just awards. They are not earned.
And it's criminal.
And it's criminal, by the way. Maybe our friend, what is his name, Okia Mtata, should go to court to question and purge all those fellows. Okia Mtata, where are you?
Just to interrupt, I forgot to say something about the Kenya Armed Forces and the dignified way in which they helped the late president.
Yes.
I want to say kudos to the forces of this country. They made us proud. They showed us what dignified things are, and they've always been professional. And I think we should give a round of applause to the defense forces of this country.
Right, thank you.
And to Kenyan people.
And to the Kenyan people as well.
Yes.
Thank you very much for your